Well, good evening, everybody. Good evening, students, and everybody else who's listening in. I hope you've had a great day. It was a lovely sunny day at the very least. And I'm going to start my lecture with a question. Why does literature and not any of the other arts appear in this series of lectures on COVID-19 next to the sciences and histories of pandemics? It's going to be quite a different lecture perhaps than the ones that have preceded me. So I'm going to try to give you an answer and a general introduction to literature and pandemics in the first half of my lecture. And first, well, why do we turn to literature at all? Maybe it's because we have been telling stories from the beginning of times, as we evolved as a species. And storytelling, which is an instance of symbolic thinking, lies at the basis of our cognitive development. Stories are at the root of our survival because they got us going long ago in the first place, when we were still painting rock art in caves. It may therefore not surprise you that in cultures around the world, stories and keeping yourself alive, telling stories and keeping yourself alive has been intimately connected. And one of the famous instances of this connection between stories and keeping yourself alive is Scheherazade in the 1001 Nights. Does any of you know the 1001 Nights, students? I would like to hear, perhaps in the chat. It's a wonderful frame narration that Scheherazade has, because the case is that she married this king who hates women because his first wife betrayed him. So then he went on killing all the wives he married ever since to revenge her. Now, however, Scheherazade is there and she has a secret weapon. She is a great storyteller, an excellent storyteller with a lot of knowledge on top of it. So the king is mesmerized when she starts telling her story and he begs for more. But then Scheherazade stops in the middle. More tomorrow. This is how she saves herself and keeps herself alive, by telling a story each day that ends with a cliffhanger. Stories keep us alive because they give us hope also. Hope that life will continue, as in the 1001 Nights, and that we may flourish in the future. Consider Giovanni Boccaccio's Decameron, which was written between 1349 and 1355 about, just after the Black Death had struck Florence. I think maybe this title has been mentioned before. It consists of a series of novellas, or new forms, each told by a member of a group of 10, 7 women and 3 men. This group has left Florence to bond, to forge a new community, and imagine the world anew through the stories they tell each other. They do not use old and rigid, tried ways of telling stories, but they try new ones, as their world, they think, has changed for good. They even attempt new democratic modes of sharing. Storytelling, perhaps, it's not just a means of personal survival, it's also a social good, which is perhaps why I'm in this lecture series tonight. I have no clue. And it's perhaps also for this reason that storytelling is annually awarded a Nobel Prize alongside chemistry, physics, economics, and peace. It's a bit of a silly prize, we all know this. Still, we are foolishly enough to engage with it, as Tom Parks had rightfully said it. But why do you think literature is there? It's a bit of an enigma to me. Does it create meaningful, transformative insights? Does it help to make the world a better place? So let's look at the assessments of a couple of Nobel Prize winners who have written on pandemics and epidemics and disease, and perhaps we get an answer to this question. So the first one, and the most hackneyed one, is of course Camus, Albert Camus, and he got his prize in 1957. Oh, and note, there are very few women who won a Nobel Prize because women have been, I'm not going to explain why, we all know. But in any case, I have to focus on some men because it's mostly men who gotten the prize. And Albert Camus has reportedly enlightened problems of human conscience in an authentic way. So that's his contribution to humanity. He has enlightened problems of human conscience in an authentic way. And he has written about people who may rise above themselves in times of evil. And that's what we like to read. We like to read that people become better and their better self when they are tried and tested. It gives us hope. Then in 1982, Gabriel Garcia Marquez got the prize. And what did he have to bring to humanity? He allowed us to penetrate different cultures and continents. So he made us familiar with what is strange and far away. And Love in Time of Cholera is a very nice example of a story about disease, even if it's not about disease at all, because cholera also means passion, which we will be presently seeing. And so disease is also a metaphor for raging passion. And then in 1998, José Saramago, a Portuguese writer, won the prize, a great writer. And what did he do? He deployed imagination and compassion to penetrate realities in a different and illuminating way. Okay, so his novel Blindness is about a sudden epidemic where people turn blind and families are separated, society disintegrates, people are killed, and then at the end everything goes away again. The epidemic is like an allegory, so it stands for something else for us to ponder on. What's at the core of this novel is, I don't think we did go blind, I think we are blind, blind but seeing, blind people who can see but do not see. I will return to this insight, blind people who can see but do not see, who do not choose to see. This insight I will return to when I'm going to discuss the novel that you read and discussed this week, William Somerset Maugham's The Painted Veil. Okay, so the conclusions that we can now draw from these Nobel Prize winners. We can say, what do writers do? Writers do something that is worthy in times of difficulty and crisis, and they speak to a world rich in cultural diversity. Their imaginative abilities can educate readers into more sophisticated and compassionate levels of perceptiveness. They can train the creativity of these readers in a foundational sense. They can challenge them to explore fresh, uneasy, and unimaginable perspectives, as readers get to meet and live with all sorts of characters in different cultures and periods for a while. So this is a certain knowledge that literature brings to us, the knowledge that comes with experience gained through intense imaginative work. And sometimes that's hard to focus on imaginative work. Literature expands our horizon, and it helps us to give meaning to life, to transform perception if necessary and if possible, and provides a context for future experiences. And this is a really important role for literature, as it has been around for some centuries to provide a context for future experiences, so we can also return to older stories to see what did people do in the past. This is why today, during the COVID pandemic, as the virus has been raging the world, novels on the plague and fictional viruses, the Spanish flu, although just very little novels have been written about the Spanish flu because the World War I happened before, and other kinds of pandemics, they have skyrocketed. Like the La Peste, it has sold out in its English stock It has sold 300% more in France than in the year before. While Dean Koontz' The Eyes of Darkness, a very foreseeing novel because it's about the Wuhan 400 virus, and it was from 1981, with symptoms closely resembling those of the coronavirus, it has skyrocketing sales figures. So apparently people have a great need for stories in times of pandemics and crisis. So what's in a novel that can trigger, teach, confront, or comfort us in such times? I want to explore that a little more. And then I will go to William Somerset Maugham's The Painted Veil. So I think we turn to novels, and perhaps not just to histories, to get a bigger historical picture and a close and personal perspective to open our imaginations. We want to know how people lived through pandemics in the past, how they managed and survived, what they felt and what they feared. We can, for instance, reopen Daniel Defoe's A Journal of the Plague Year from 1722, and I can highly recommend you reading this 18th century work. It was such a convincing work on the plague of London in 1665, the bubonic plague, that people thought it was a real journal from 1665. And that's no accident, because when you read a first-person account, which this one is, like Robinson Crusoe, which Daniel Defoe wrote as well in the 18th century, you're drawn into the story and you're very close to the narrator. And this fosters your engagement. And with engagement, you learn a lot faster. So what can we learn from this very old novel? Normally, I would ask some of the students to read this passage. Is there anybody who would like to volunteer? I see that many of you have muted your microphones. Oh, sorry, sometimes you hear my dog. It's a bit, she's moaning. Anybody who would like to read this passage? Okay, I will read it myself. So this is how A Journal of the Plague Year opens, okay? It was about the beginning of September 1664 that I, among the rest of my neighbors, heard in ordinary discourse that the plague was returned again in Holland. For it had been very violent there, and particularly at Amsterdam and Rotterdam. In the year 1663, whither, they say, it was brought, some said from Italy, others from the Levant, among some goods which were brought home by their Turkey fleet. We had no such thing as printed newspapers in those days to spread rumors and report of things. All was kept very private. Hence it was that this rumor died off again, and people began to forget it as a thing we were very little concerned in, and that we hoped wasn't true. And then, of course, disaster struck. So what we read now at the very beginning about the dangers of secrecy in the absence of printed news networks. It's a vital aspect of democratic societies. And yeah, it's a contrast to, I would like to say, it's a contrast to the transparency and openness that we experience today. And yes, but only to a certain extent, of course. Openness is still an ideal that we aspire to. We haven't quite reached it yet. As we then read on in this remarkable work, we also discover something else, a bit, disconcerting. What we read is a rehash of the past, I must say, that we are living right now, when the crisis of COVID-19 started. The initial disbelief and indifference. So we already see that a bit here, and you just hope it's not true, so you try to forget about it. Rumors of fake cures. I heard many of them. People seeing the crisis as divine punishment. I heard many say that COVID-19 is Mother Earth striking back. Ineffective governance in many countries. but also effective. Deception and fake solidarity. Fake because Europe's lockdown means hunger for Africa and more victims dying from malaria or other diseases that we don't have in Europe. Anxiety, the rich saving themselves at the expense of the poor. It's all the same. We have not progressed very far since 3 centuries ago. Humans are humans. And that's a great insight. That progress may be happening because we have better medication, although medication doesn't work right now, but that it's also always an illusion. So let's take that with us as a lesson from literature. It's perhaps not something that students of medicine can deploy to cure a population, but it's just an insight to take with them and to keep them humble. Okay, so now I'm getting to the novel that students have prepared for today. Oh, this is an image of time that is recycling. The novel that you have prepared for today is William Somerset Maugham's The Painted Veil. It focuses on this power of illusion that is very, very strong in all societies, and how it may be broken in times of crisis. How to become truthful with yourself. That's what this novel is about, if that's possible. It's dated in its language, it's repetitive, and it's also often cliched. And it's also painfully racist in its portrayal of the Chinese. But this story of a young, estranged British couple seems to tell us one thing. You can do all the good work you want as a doctor or a nun, but without personal awareness, you will never get yourself or anyone else anywhere. Okay, I got an email from the students asking me, so what can we learn from this book? Is there anything we can take away from it? Because we don't get it. It's not about COVID-19. It's about cholera. It's about passion. It's set in China, and people die by the millions. It's not exactly the same. So what can we learn? The thing is, in literature, you don't learn general rules. For instance, general rules to save people. You learn insights, some very useful, on a very singular level. So it's about this story, these people, that gives you something to take away from it. This is what I wanted to point out. So to really manage your expectations, that literature won't give you a cure to save a population, but it will give you an indication how you could become perhaps a better doctor, or a better nun for that matter, because there's nuns in the novel, or a better healthcare worker. Imagination can get you pretty far. Okay. William Somerset Maugham was a trained physician. He was a doctor himself. He never practiced because he was such a great writer that he could live off his novels from right after he finished his studies. But he used his skill for personal observation, which is something that doctors, of course, do, personal observation, very well as a novelist. William Somerset Maugham was extremely popular between the 1910s and the 1940s, though not exactly Nobel Prize winning material. But his big hits include Of Human Bondage and The Razor's Edge. So The Razor's Edge is from 1944 and Of Human Bondage from 1915. The latter novel was the favorite novel of my father, who was a doctor as well. And it's about a traumatized World War I pilot who tries to find inner peace through embodied practice in India. I can tell you there's a whole set of writers preceding the hippie age that went to India, to ashrams to find enlightenment. But that history perhaps has yet to be written. But it's a very fine instance of somebody seeking spiritual peace. Now, the painted veil is also a bit in this spiritual tradition. And it takes as its motto a line from a poem by the poet Percy Shelley. The painted veil which those who live call life. That's the motto of the book. The painted veil which those who live call life. Okay. Yeah, I'm already giving away, of course, my comments with this line, because I wanted to ask you, what does this mean, of course? Well, many of us go through life without knowing that we are enshrouded in this veil of self-deception. We are angry at others. We feel a suffering that may not be real at all because it's just imaginary. We have very harsh judgments of others because we do not want to recognize some stuff in ourselves. We project all kinds of stuff onto other people. And we have very, very ingrained stuff in us that that poisons us. And so we go through life knowing, well, not knowing that we are deceiving ourselves. But then sometimes when we are hard pressed in difficult times, in times of crisis, times of evil, as Camus would have said, the veil may be lifted, who knows, when we are pressured, when we are cornered, when we fall, when we go through very, very hard times. Some, disintegrate and others learn. And so this is why the painted veil, those who live call life, is at the beginning of this novel, because Somerset Maugham was really interested in solving such problems. Literature is like if you want, a laboratory, a fictional laboratory, where people behave and feel and act in certain ways. And you as a reader, and of course, firstly, the writer, you can test all kinds of behavior in this laboratory, you can predict how people could behave. You can explore what are the implications of certain behaviors or feelings or insights, and then you can, paint that in a life. And this is why literature is very, very interesting to people beyond the discipline itself. Well, lifting the veil is what happens to Kitty. Kitty is the main protagonist, the main character of The Painted Veil. And the story revolves around her personal transformation against the background of an epidemic in China, a cholera epidemic. Now, it's very, very extraordinary that a male writer should take a female character, and focus on her personal development. Mostly novels are written by men, are about men. Not so this one, and Somerset Maugham, who was queer, zooms in entirely on Kitty and how she transforms herself. She's caught in the prison of, well, with a technical term, the prison of patriarchic society, which means that she is born into a society in the 1910s, where women have no way of making their way in the world independently, economically. They just have to depend on marrying well and sketch out a life for themselves when they are even of a certain class. When they are in a working class, they just need to work and die very, very soon. Okay, so the story of the novel, I have to share the story a bit because there's other people listening in. So this might be a bit boring to the students. I would have loved one of the students to share the story. I don't see anybody volunteering yet.
Yeah, Kiene, due to the security, all the microphones are, but if they want to share, they can type or raise their hand in the chat, and then I can unlock their microphone.
Yeah, so if there is anybody who would like to tell what this story is about, they are welcome to do so now.
Or what you have discussed in the group in the afternoon.
Yeah, that will come later. That will come
Okay,
later.
okay, okay.
I'm very curious to hear that, of course. So, Roos, do you see anybody?
No volunteers.
No volunteers. Well, okay, I have to do it myself then. What a disappointment. Kitty Garstin, that's you see her in the top left, because a movie was made of this novel in 26, if I remember well. Kitty Garstin marries Walter Fane, who is at her right there, in a panic. She's beautiful and could have married very well because of her beauty, but she waited too long. She thought she could choose for too long. So she settles for Walter Fane, a bacteriologist, and soon they move to Hong Kong, where he has found a job. Kitty is bored with Walter because he's just dull and intelligent, and he's not at all about fun in life. And she has an affair with charming but self-centered Charlie Temple, who you see there down at the right. Walter finds out and, revengeful, corners Kitty. He says, well, either I give you a divorce, or you go with me to the city of Maitan Fu, where a cholera epidemic is raging. Seeing through Charlie's narcissism, Walter is sure that Charlie will not divorce his wife and marry Kitty or help her. And yeah, he won't. He's too selfish. He wants to get rid of her. So go she must with Walter to Maitan Fu. But instead of dying, which she fears and which Walter intends, she grows. She starts growing. She starts seeing through Charlie and through her own needs and desires and motives for loving him. So that's the most important part. She sees through her own motives for loving him. She experiences the pleasures of friendship and compassion, and she starts helping the French convent with the French nuns who are situated in that town, who help cholera patients and orphaned Chinese children, girls who have been rejected by their families. In the end, it is not Kitty, but Walter who dies. His last words are a line from the Elegy on the Death of a Mad Dog by an 18th century Irish poet, Oliver Goldsmith. He says, can you imagine, right before you die, you give a quote? Okay, so he says, the dog it was that died. The dog it was that died. Why does Walter say this? The dog it was that died. And I must tell you, one of the students who responded to the story and to my question, so what do you think about Kitty's transformation, has already discovered it. So I'm going to quote this student in a minute. First, you're going to read An Elegy on the Death of a Mad Dog by Oliver Goldsmith. It's a really great piece of verse. Rhythmically, it's very well done. So I'm giving you the last bits. A kind and gentle heart he had, this was the master of a dog, to comfort friends and foes. The naked every day he clad, when he put on his clothes. And in that town a dog was found, as many dogs there be, both mongrel, puppy, whelp and hound, and curse of low degree. Then one day the dog bites the man, and he gets an awful wound in this same poem. Everybody swears the man will die because of this wound, and the dog was mad. But then the man recovered from the bite, the dog it was that died. The man recovered from the bite, the dog it was that died. So this is a reversal of fortune, and remember this phrase, a reversal of fortune. Right before he dies, Walter receives a blow. With a shock, he realizes that not Kitty, but he is the mad dog. A curse of low degree. As my students, as this student writes, the plague did trigger Kitty's moral change. And maybe that's also the reason she was spared the horrible fate of dying from cholera. Her husband Walter refused this change. He never forgave Kitty and ended up suffering the consequences. So the implication is from the student, and I really like this comment, it made me in fact change the last bit of my talk here. Kitty receives her blow in time, apparently. And Mom describes the moment very well when she realizes that Charlie does not love her because, well, he can only love himself, and that Walter, hurt and vengeful, knew this all along. So Kitty falls in love with Charlie, and she doesn't see through him, and you know, most importantly, not through herself. She sees a very charming man who has the ability to, you know, to blow himself up, to inflate himself, so that everybody loves him and everybody believes in him. But then when things come to, you know, a crisis, and when somebody needs to act, Charlie just walks away. And she had never expected this. She thought, you know, Charlie would help her because he'd been so in love with her, etc., etc. And then Mom, who wasn't very good with metaphors, and this is why he always remained a sort of minor writer, because he wrote in a nice plain language, which I rather like, he has a great metaphor here for her shock. And it goes like this. It's in the middle of the book. Vaguely, as when you are studying a foreign language and read a page which at first you can make nothing of, until a word or sentence gives you a clue, and on a sudden suspicion, as it were, of the sense flashes through your troubled wits, vaguely she gained an inkling into the workings of Walter's mind. It was like a dark and ominous landscape, seen by a flash of lightning, and in a moment hidden again by the night. She shuddered at what she saw. So she shudders because she starts learning a lesson. When you see your own faults clearly, but you can forgive yourself for it, you can start becoming kinder to your people around you. But Walter, the good doctor who sacrifices himself for his patients, refuses forgiveness. So he becomes mean. He becomes a mad dog after Kitty hurts him. And he cannot transcend his suffering. He refuses her forgiveness. For him, the shock of self-insight comes too late. It is a shock of death, even though death is the ultimate transformation in itself, of course. Kitty, Kitty is aligned with death. On the other hand, she is pregnant, it turns out, with a girl, and she doesn't know whose it is, probably Charlie's. But in any case, it's a metaphor or a symbol that something new can happen, new life will be given birth to. So to answer the question of my students, what do we learn from this novel? Well, what do we learn? It's a good question. Beware of vanity, of thinking you're better than others, as Walter does. The intelligent, good-doing doctor above the once frivolous and selfish wife. Recognize that people can change and rise above themselves in very small ways. This is what Kitty does. Or just make good use of the shocks in life and hope they come in time. I think that's some good piece of advice. Make good use of the shocks in your life and hope they come in time. Kitty often tells her friend Mr. Waddington, if death is all around us, what do we care about the little things that happen in life? Like adultery, or any other thing. A row. One day we're all going to disappear, we're all going to die, and we will not leave a trace. Today I saw a picture, for instance, of the house of my parents when they, and you know, nothing is left. It's a completely bare field. Their house is gone, the garden is gone, nothing is left. Only the mailbox, that's still standing. And this will happen to all of us. We will go, we will die, we will leave no trace behind. And it's good because then new life can start again. The painted veil shows us that we should seize the moment, not just to enjoy life, as we often are told, seize the moment, be happy, do it. No, it's seize the moment to be truthful with ourselves. to scrutinize ourselves so that we can become more humane with others. I think, and that's very important. Perhaps it's more important than than clapping for other people. Try to be more humane with others, and not just once. Another student noted that Kitty's transformation is not exactly complete. She doesn't believe in Kitty, and that's her good right. Because back in Hong Kong, when Kitty has left Mai Tan Fu, she sees Charlie again. And what happens? Lo and behold, they sleep again. And where they do that in the house of Charlie, where his wife is present, Dorothy. And she has been so kind to Kitty. But it doesn't feel good to Kitty. So read what she has to say. Shame, shame. She had thought herself changed. She had thought herself strong. She had thought she had returned to Hong Kong a woman who possessed herself. And she had hoped to be so much better in the future. Freedom like a spirit of light had beckoned her. And now she seems to be back at the beginning. And the students is certainly severe. She only seems to have changed. Her transformation is just a veil. But we can also interpret this story differently. And this is why I say we have to practice self-scrutiny again and again, not just once. Freedom is, if this is what is beckoning Kitty, does not come suddenly and all at once. It comes and it goes. Freedom comes and goes like happiness. It comes and goes. Transformation is never complete, and anybody who thinks it can be complete, well, it's very, no, it's impossible. Awareness is never fully and stably reached because you keep on fooling yourself anyway. Everything is fleeting. As a good friend of mine would say, relax. Cholera, which, you know, passion, is a trigger in this story to discover the fragility of freedom. This is what I think. It's a never-ending process, and that is precisely the point of Kitty. The fact that she recognizes her vanity, her hopelessness, her shame, that's a good thing. That's a good start to work on herself and keep on working on herself. So all this may sound a bit, you know, soft, etc., 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 and ideal and idealistic. But I think for students of medicine and healthcare, self-scrutiny seems to me quite helpful. Often, literature has been said to foster empathy. It trains us to understand another position, another's point of view. And this is why perhaps you have this week engaged in creative activity, writing a poem, to try other perspectives and to widen your horizon. Yet, as the painted veil shows, true compassion only comes when we can forgive the ones we despise the most. That's the big challenge. And when we realize that our viewpoints, interpretations may be wrong, think that you might be wrong. That should be, well, that should be the motto of all our lives. Think that you might be wrong. And I think that's a great motto for a doctor, by the way. It's not just literature, the stories that we read, I think, but the practice of literary interpretation that will get us to that realization, that will get us to work with that motto in a meaningful way. There is a philosopher called Hans-Georg Gadamer, and he was a student of Heidegger. Well, I shouldn't say that because that was the big sorrow in his life, that he was the student of the big philosopher Martin Heidegger. But there, I already said it. And what he said is that literary interpretation, historical interpretation, the science of interpretation at large is not simply an academic activity of scholars immersed in books, but a mode of being of human life itself. A mode of being of human life itself. We interpret every day. I mean, when you get up and you open your eyes, you're already interpreting the room around you. You interpret signs, traffic lights, the dog wanting to go out of the house. Everything we interpret in a split second. So the lives that we lead and the experiences that we have, we are already scrutinizing that, even on an unconscious level. And we project meanings onto people all the time, as I just already pointed out to you, ourselves and events, just as we project meanings onto text. And just try to be aware how often we do that. It's incredible. We have this viewer or projector in our head, and we keep on projecting meaning onto others, and they haven't asked for such meanings in the first place. All our lives, we have to learn to target these projected meanings and to think that they may be false, that people or events may resist such meanings, and that we may need to revise our position. So Hans-Georg Gadamer, the philosopher, remember him because he has made scientific, academic science, the science of interpretation, into a position, an embodied position in the world that you should take up and constantly say to yourself, think that you might be wrong. And then research and think again and work hard again to get to the truth, to get to a good result, or to get to other meanings. A little Hans-Georg Gadamer may perhaps do a world of good to students of medicine, to engage with their patients who may be eluding them, and to healthcare workers having to face difficult cases of life and death. The diversity of responses from the students to the story already illustrates the point. Even when you think you're in agreement with someone at the same level, you are probably not. Mostly you are not. So to wrap this up, our current fascination with pandemics has led us to literature in this lecture. It's a bit of a dangerous fascination that we have with literature at this moment. We turn to great writers and their stories to find solace in a time of what we think is big change. And that's what we like. A big story saying, well, now the world is going to be completely different from what it was before. Brace yourselves, etc., etc. But then life is change. Everything changes constantly. Things have never been the same. And this is also what the novel by Somerset Maugham has taught us. Before and after do not really exist. So be not just prepared for the big shock that comes to change your life, but be prepared to be constantly aware in little and seemingly insignificant ways in your professions, or as a friend, as a mother, as a father, as a teacher. Okay, I had expected to be more interactive with you, but now I'm going to save that for the last bit of this lecture. And I would like to share you the way you have responded to the novel. I've already highlighted some of your responses, and now Roos can perhaps help me to moderate.
Yes.
Okay, the students have been divided into groups and they have given their responses. Okay, I would like to invite you right now to share your findings.
If you type your name, then I can unmute you. Kitty, je moet, of ik ga Kitty tegen je zeggen. Je moet even je stop sharing.
Wacht even. Stop share?
Ja.
Oké. Ja. Ik zie hier wat in de chat.
Ja, maar er is nog niemand.
Nee, er is nog niemand.
Kennen, wil jij voor jouw groepje?
Ja hoor, dat wil ik wel. Wij hadden niet specifiek statements opgeschreven of bedacht die we wilden vertellen, maar er waren wel meerdere dingen die gezegd werden die misschien wel interessant waren.
English.
Oh, I'm sorry. One of the comments that one of our students gave, which I found very interesting, was made by, I believe, Cindy or Chantal, one of the two, was about that she found that Kitty sort of moved in a fight, flight, fright reaction. And she illustrated the 3 stages in which she acted in those 3 stages throughout the book very nicely. So maybe she could share that comment with the rest of the group.
Yeah, that was very interesting.
Maybe she could be unmuted and illustrate.
Hoe?
This was either Cindy or Chantal. I should look that up. I'm sorry that I don't have that sharp. Kijk waar ik heb een centje.
Cindy?
Maybe you can mute them both just to be sure. It was Cindy. Cindy, yeah.
Cindy, you're unmuted.
Oh, yes. Hello. I was the person from the fight, flight, fright reaction, because in the beginning of the book she was asked to Walter, would you like to go to the cholera epidemic? And she refused, and she wanted to start her life with Mr. Townsend. So I thought that would be the flight reaction from her. But Mr. Townsend refused to start a life with her. So she began to roll in the fright reaction, because she was afraid to die when she would go to the cholera epidemic. And after in the book, when she really was in that village with the cholera epidemic, she was more in a fight station where she worked with the weeshuis, orphan house.
Yes.
And yeah, that was the thing that noticed me in the book, that she really went through all the stages.
Okay, so you've really looked at her as a doctor, haven't you? And you have diagnosed the stages of her experience?
Yeah.
And why did you use that framework?
I don't really have a reason for that, but it was just the first thing that jumped into my mind. Like, first that flight reaction, then the fright, and then eventually that fight reaction.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't really have a reason for that. It just came into me.
Okay, because normally when you would make an interpretation like that, it's very nice. You choose your framework, and then you would also motivate your choice and convince your audience why this is a valid diagnosis, and why this illuminates something about Kitty that we would have missed otherwise.
Yeah, well, I don't, I don't really have a motivation. I think it was just something that, it was just something that jumped into my mind. Like, she was really frightened at first. Like, she wanted to run away from the situation, and eventually she accepted that she had to go and was really frightened.
And can you see the parallels between your interpretation and mine?
Yes, I can see it, but yeah, I think everyone has another perspective to a book, and each perspective is unique. So yeah, you read the same story, so there are parallels, but I think that it also is important to see that everyone has another perspective of the book.
Yes, very, very well said. And what does that tell you when you're going to be trained as a health worker? What does that tell you when all your, and also I'm asking this to the other students, so you read the same material, let's say it's a case study about a woman in flight, etc. And everybody has a different perspective and looks at different dimensions of the story, looks at it in a different light. What does that tell you? Is that something that you engage or encounter during your training?
I don't know if I have to answer this, but I will do it.
That would be really nice.
The thing is that we are sort of getting taught that we need to stay open for everyone's opinion.
Yeah.
So that also means for everyone's perspective. But I still think that it can be a hard job for a health worker to someone else's perspective if you're very solid on your opinion. So I think that is one of the hardest thing you need to do as a health worker, to step in someone else's perspective. But they are trying to teach us that.
they are trying to teach you. Could anybody else anybody wants to join, because that's a big challenge also for a teacher, huh? Because I'm talking to you now and I see just black screens, which is incredibly difficult. But normally when I'm teaching in class, I have no clue what my students are thinking. So it's very, very hard for a teacher or a doctor or a mother or a father or whatever to get on the same wavelength of somebody else. And this is the ideal, of course, for a health worker, I would say, to get there. And do you think that it will help you to practice interpretation a bit more structurally than you would have normally in your training? Okay, yeah, I'm guessing I'm asking Cindy again because you're unmuted.
No, but I'm trying to unmute somebody else, but it doesn't.
Okay.
For some reason or another, I cannot unmute Noor. But Noor asked, what was the importance of the death of Kitty's mother? So that's not an answer to your last question.
The importance of the death of her mother, well, I would see it as a further stage in her liberation, because the fact that I haven't addressed this yet, the fact that why does she fall in love with a narcissist? Why do people fall in love with a narcissist?
I had an idea that maybe she had daddy issues because of the way her mom raised her to not get very close with her own dad. And that resulted in her having such a bad taste in men.
Yes, well, thank you very much. Yes, you've just said what I tried to say. Thank you very much, Noor. Yes, or you could also say that the mom, you could also go a bit further. The mom has raised Kitty in a certain way, also because there was no alternative. When you look at it psychologically, it's the mother doesn't really love Kitty. She's just trying to force her into a good marriage, and she does all she can to accomplish this, and she only loves Kitty insofar as Kitty can be a social success because she's beautiful. So it's a very selfish love. But then what can a mother do in a patriarchic system where she has no other way of raising her daughter into independence than in such a way. So it's also a social problem, apart from it being a psychological problem. Would you agree with that, Noor?
Yes, but then to me it wouldn't make sense why Kitty in the end decides to do it differently with her own daughter.
Yes, and why does that not make? Yeah, because it's a social problem. You say she would have had to do the same.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, perhaps it's 25 years later, and perhaps some changes have been made socially. But I agree with you. Kitty only gets her independence because her husband dies, and she can do what she wants, and then she wants her daughter to be different.
Okay, yeah, that makes more sense. Thank you.
No, it makes a lot of sense what you said. Thank you very much. Yeah, Kenan?
Oh, hi. Yeah, I had wanted to react to a comment previous to the question of Noor about being on the same wavelength or being able to, because I found that a really interesting notion. Because I think a week ago I was talking with someone who I work with. It's an elderly person, and I work as a healthcare taker. Person. I had a discussion with him because he's very disabled, and I asked him if he was if he was able to do that with people. He's always lived his life out of a very different perspective than the people that work there, because they're obviously more healthy than he is. And I asked him, like, do you ever feel that people actually understand the way that you live your life? And he quite blatantly said no, or like that there was one person in 80 years of his life that actually really understood where he was coming from. And that showed to me that not that you shouldn't strive to be able to get on the same wavelength, but the difficulty of doing that. And that if you really want to be able to be on that wavelength, you should constantly try and ask that to the person in front of you. So I found it a really interesting notion. But this was something out of my experience that I wanted to share, because I think it really relates nicely to how you commented on this.
Absolutely, Kenan. What Maugham tries to tell us, that any awareness the idea that you will reach any awareness is an illusion, can nicely be applied to what you just said. Getting on the same wavelength is always impossible, and you should start from that so that you can constantly scrutinize yourself to be aware of that impossibility, and then you can start to establish a rapport with somebody else. Am I summarizing you correctly, Kenan?
Yes, you are.
Yeah. So it's if you focus on the limitedness, the limitations of yourself and others, you will get you will get further than when you think, oh, everything can be solved and we can have total transparency and openness between other people. It's just impossible.
Yeah.
Yeah, so just be aware of those limitations, and it will. Yeah, thank you, Kenan. That's a wonderful way of merging the problems of a healthcare giver and the novel that we just discussed, I think.
Yes, thank you.
And I would like to hear at least the student whom I quoted, who brought in the novel by Goldsmith. The poem.
The dog?
Yeah, the dog. That phrase, just very interestingly, the dog it was that died, that phrase was actually used in an article to describe the death of that Chinese doctor who had announced COVID-19 and who then died. It's sort of a misapplication, because the dog it was that died then supposedly refers to this doctor, while of course it should be the reverse, but that's very interesting. It even went viral, this poem by Goldsmith. But this student, I don't know her or his name. Roos, perhaps you can find.
I don't know. Yeah, but I don't know how I can find it back, because it's in.
Okay.
Haha. Well, I got Nasia. Yeah, you're unmuted. Great. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was doing a workout at the same time as listening to the lecture, so I'm a bit out of breath. Yeah, what do I have to say?
Well, I was delighted with your observations on what happens in this novel, and I just wanted to see you because I quoted. And,
yeah, I'm sorry. I was really listening. The reason why I
don't excuse
decided
yourself.
to
No.
look up the quote, or because as you mentioned, it was kind of weird that he died with a quote. So I googled it and I just tried to explain it in the moral context.
Yes.
The assignment provided.
Oh, okay. And would you like to add anything that Canon just observed? Is there anything you can relate to from the position that you took with regard to this novel, this story?
No, exactly as you already explained. I really saw the transformation, her personal transformation in the entire book. And as for her mother's death, I thought it was like because Kitty's father, he was also kind of like Walter. He was fine with everything, and his wife was like a weight on his back. And when she died, he was also free, like Kitty when Walter died, in a way.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, I just saw it like a second chance for Kitty to start a new relationship that she couldn't do with Walter in the right way.
Yeah, I
got
agree.
a second chance.
Yeah, a second chance, and to be completely rid of that monstrous block around her neck.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you for appearing on screen.
Yeah, I just had to explain my out of breath situation.
No, never mind. Thank you very much, Roos. I guess I'm done.